The object that I'd like to talk about, and this is our second case study, is this pair of early modern gloves made roughly from about 1590 to 1610. We can't be exact. These are on display in the British galleries in the Victoria and Albert Museum. Now, gloves were in fact the foundational object that we studied in developing the gendered object interpretation methodology that underpins this toolkit. At its most basic level, this basically is a way of looking at the gendered aspects of objects across multiple itineraries, from materials, production, consumption, use, display, transmission, and archiving, so how they're interpreted in museums. And the glove was chosen because it was a ubiquitous accessory worn by people across society, and also it was deeply embedded in social, cultural, religious, economic, and political rituals. The gloves that we see here are a wonderful example of the kind of elaborate embroidered glove that survives in museum collections from this period around the world. And they're made of white leather with gauntlet tapestry woven in silk and gold on woolen warps. And they feature patterns of trees and floral sprigs, strawberries with peacocks, parrots, owls and other birds. Now, since all genders wore gloves in early modern Europe and floral decoration like this was not gender specific, it's particularly difficult to work out which gender this pair of gloves was in fact made for. And this is one of the challenges that curators face. But more ordinarily, other gloves were clearly demarcated for male and female wearers, according to style and also according to function. Now, the processes of production, knitting, cutting and sewing connected to early modern glove production delineate the gendered division of labour in what are layered stages of glove manufacture. And what's interesting about gloves is that a high proportion of girls and women were either apprentices or mistresses in the glover's company, far more than other guilds, which says something very interesting about the nature of the glove industry. Now, although these gloves have been historically attributed to the famous Sheldon tapestry workshops, it may be more likely that they were produced by one of the many small weaving workshops operated in London by Flemish weavers who were religious refugees from violence in Europe. Women were excluded from the weaving of cloth with large looms on the basis of their size and strength. They weren't felt to be strong enough to do such manly tasks, but they'd have still been able to weave small-scale tapestry decoration like these gauntlets, and the materials with which gloves were decorated relied on women's labour, often very poorly paid. Now, the ubiquity of gloves as an early modern fashion accessory in Europe resulted in demand for North American deerskins, and this was what a lot of leather was made from. And the deerskin trade reshaped gender relations among the Creek Native Americans who supplied the skins. And what happened was it changed men's hunting practices, separating men from women for much longer periods of time, and it encouraged European men to seek marriage with Native American women for the strategic trade advantages that such relationships would bring. Gloves also importantly had other material properties which affected how they were interpreted and how they communicated at the time. They were often, for example, scented, and the smell that they had would have had gender connotations, much of which are lost to us today. Gloves enabled people to make significant gestures which differed depending on gender. So women could seduce by dropping gloves, and men could challenge each other by throwing down a glove or striking an opponent across the face with a gauntlet. And similarly, the wearing or removal of gloves affected the erotic dynamics of male-female relationships, and ostentatious, even flamboyant gauntlets worn by men drew contemporary charges of effeminacy and foppery. Gloves were important cultural symbols invested with rich meaning. They functioned as gifts at court, even given to Queen Elizabeth I. They were given as gifts at weddings and funerals. They were passed on as bequests or collected for historical and aesthetic significance. And they gained meaning as memory objects, as relics, and as museum artifacts. In other words, gloves then acquired new meanings in different contexts through a process of becoming as they were transformed from materials and travelled to museums.